Sometimes getting your car fixed can be a really frustrating experience. And sometimes the problem is that you just don't know where to take the car to get the job done. There's lots of different kind of shops that are in the automobile servicing business, and some of them are really very specialized. The selling dealer for your brand of car knows it pretty well since he sold it new. Now, most of the mechanics there have had some factory training, and sometimes their tools are specially designed just to take care of your car. The prices are usually high, and due to the volume of work that some of them bring in, the service tends to be somewhat, well, impersonal. An independent shop doesn't have new car sales to fall back on, so when they are working on your car, all they got to sell is service. Now, very often they're not as hip on the new models as a dealer shop, but they usually get caught up in about a year or so. You get a more personalized kind of a service since you're quite likely to be dealing with the owner himself when somebody finally starts working on your car. Mass merchandiser is the trade name for a chain or a department store that has a repair shop built in. Some just sell and install tires and batteries, but some do really big jobs up to and including the replacement of engines. One of the big advantages that a mass merchandiser has over their competition is that you can shop while your car's getting worked on, and when the work is done, you can put it on your charge account. Specialty shops are operations that do just one kind of a job. An automatic transmission shop, for instance, just works on automatic transmissions, and a tune-up shop just does tune-ups. And some specialty shops concentrate on just one brand of car, even though they don't have anything to do with the dealer himself. There's still a lot of service stations that do mechanical work in the back room, and if the mechanics are good, the place really thrives. Service station management gives a good mechanic who wants to get out and get on his own a way to do it and get into business without having to hawk his family and his house in order to get going. The diagnostics shop does just that. It diagnoses your car for what ails it, and then the mechanics tell you what's wrong. They're usually operated by an auto club, and since they don't have anything to sell, they don't embellish on the problems. It's a good place to find out what ails a car, especially if it's one that you're planning to buy. Now, some folks work on their own cars, and in that case, an auto machine shop is the only place to go. Now, after a few semesters in the high school auto shop program, the average student can take on a job like removing and replacing the cylinder head, but doing the machine work on that head is another story. That takes an automotive machinist, and he'll grind the valves and surface the head and do whatever else it needs. Auto machine shops usually rent space from a parts store, and the reason that they do that is so that they'll have parts nice and handy when they're going to have to finish up your head. And if you don't like to clean up your car yourself, there's even shops that can help you do this. They're great places to go when you want to get your car ready to sell, too. Sometimes it's hard to find a really good shop to work on your car. But when you do, you can usually trust the mechanic not to oversell you, because he probably has more work than he can handle anyway. Nice car, new Ford Mustang. Fast, economical, and very sporty. But actually, it's not all that new, and especially the name. The name has been around for a long, long time. This is a '65 Mustang, 20 years old this year. And in those years, it's become one of the most collectible cars in America. Now, when the Mustang first hit the United States in 1964, in the middle of it, it was really something very different to American buyers, at least to the sports car buyers. Until that time, sports cars had been two-seaters, very drafty, rather uncomfortable, and definitely not the American cup of tea. But the Mustang was different. It had room for 4 people, came with an optional automatic transmission, and that's something that the sports car buffs really found appalling. And it could be had with either a somewhat anemic 6-cylinder engine or a more muscular V8. Ford had done a lot of research before they bought out the Mustang. They found that there were a lot of young buyers out there who wanted something that was fast and sporty, but they didn't want to give up their comfort. And that's just what Lee Iacocca gave them. Yeah, that's right. The same Chairman Lee that's now head man at Chrysler. Back then he was the wonder boy of the Ford Motor Company and the guy that started the pony car age before Chevy could introduce its Camaro or Pontiac its Firebird. Ford beat the competition by more than 3 years, and the insiders say that it was the thing that saved the company. It pulled it out of a financial doldrum. The pony car market became a real battlefield in short order, and all the companies got into racing in a big way. They all had official factory-owned teams of cars that slugged it out on sports car tracks all over the country. So Sunday's winners became Monday's sales leaders, and all the manufacturers, even AMC, got their share of the spotlight. So it's no wonder that the early Ford Mustang is a desirable car. It's fast, comfortable, easy to take care of, and there's still a ready supply of parts available if you need them. There's a social aspect to owning an older Mustang, too. In my own area, the Diablo Valley Mustang Association is very active, holds picnics, rallies, and all kinds of social events. Mustangs aren't too hard to come by either. You can pick up a fairly good one for around $2,000, though a convertible like this one, of course, goes for considerable more. The first generation cars, of course, built from '64 to '66, are still the best, as in the eyes of most of the owners, and are the most desirable. Ford got into trouble in '74 when it brought out a special-bodied Pinto and slapped the Mustang logo on it. It was pretty grim. The Mustang from '71 to '73 was a little overweight and underpowered, so the 1970 version is usually considered the last of the classic Mustangs. So, will the new Mustang be the collectible car that this old-timer is? I don't know. Got a hell of a reputation to live up to. Auto America likes to get around. We like to take a nibble of everything that has to do with automobiles. Now, most of us have been to a used car lot once in our lives, at least once, and sometimes the experience is good, and sometimes it's bad. But whether you go to Fantasy Junction here in Berkeley to seriously look for a set of wheels to buy, or just to look over the stock of machinery, you're bound to have a good time, because it's one of the most unusual used car operations that you'll ever see. Bruce Trenery is the owner of Fantasy Junction, and I know he's been a car nut ever since his high school days in El Cerrito. But Bruce, let me ask you this. How did you happen to get in the exotic car business?
Well, basically, I've enjoyed cars throughout my whole life. I've always studied about them and read all the magazines and everything I could find about them. And particularly sports cars and GT cars during the 60s when I was going to school. There was a lot more difference in the racing cars and the cars that were being offered by the different factories visually than there are now, or there is now. And you could really identify with a different make, and I really enjoyed learning all about them.
So it's been kind of an ongoing love affair with these things, huh?
If it's got wheels, we like it.
I got you. Well, listen, where do you get these cars?
The cars come from all over the world. We import some, we export quite a few. Most of the cars in here right now have come from collectors in this area.
And I notice that you don't put the prices of the cars on the windshields like they do in a lot of used car operations. How much do these things cost?
They range mostly on the average in here between about $12,000 and $20,000.
Okay, and what kind of guys buy them?
Generally it'd be the professional class, I would say, the people that have excess money for a toy, because most of them are toys rather than general transportation.
I see, and for a difference between the toys, men and boys, is the prices, I guess, huh?
That's what they say.
Okay, and well, this Dino, for instance, how much is that going for?
That one's $25,000.
And that's, even though it says Dino, it's really a Ferrari, I guess, huh?
Well, they're classified now by most of the people as Ferraris. When they first came out, there was a discrepancy because it was a 6-cylinder car, and Ferrari only called Ferraris 12-cylinder cars, or 12-cylinder cars Ferrari.
So the difference between the toys of men and boys is just the price, huh?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, do any of these cars get raced? I know you do some racing yourself, and you have special cars here that are for classic car racers.
Yes, right now we only have one. This Parnell here is for vintage car racing.
And you do some of the racing yourself, huh?
I run a little bit of vintage car racing and did run some SCCA racing last year.
I see. How about that Trans-American race? I know you were in that. You got to tell me something about that. That's
Well,
just
they called it the Great America Race, which was a publicity situation because it was more of a time and distance rally, because you can't run 100 old cars across the country in a race on the public roads. But it was a very interesting situation with people from all over the world, all walks of life, all kinds of vehicles, from fire trucks to motorcycles to sports cars, and just a general party for 12 days. It was wonderful.
Now, when you say old, how old is old?
The earliest vehicle that finished, I think, was a 1916 Mitchell, Bob.
Oh, my God. The guys must have been very brave to take off in something that old.
A lady drove it.
Well, really? Wow. What did you
Southern
drive?
California. We drove a 1930 Speed 6 Bentley, Le Mans replica.
Now, was that a local car?
No, it was flown over from London for the event.
Guy flew it over just for that race, huh?
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow.
And they flew it back from New York.
Holy smokes. Well, listen, enough of this chit-chat. Tell me what you got in this place.
Well, we have things like the Parnell, which is a vintage racer they only made one of. It was a widened Formula One Lotus that was driven by Mike Spence, one of the team drivers, and they drove it 3 times in international races, and then Spence went off to try his luck in Indianapolis and was killed, so that the effort stopped right there, and the car ended up going on blocks, so it hasn't really been raced much since 1966.
Yeah, how much are you asking for that?
That one's $25,500.
Now, do you ever take cars on trade?
Oh, sure. We try and stay with things that are interesting rather than station wagons and
I
things.
see. So you're not interested in my 77 Chevy with a broken window, huh?
Well,
You can deal, I know. You can deal.
We'll
Okay.
find some place to put
I
it.
got you. And what else have you got here?
Well, we've got a couple of Ferraris right now, Bob. And this is a 12-cylinder. This is a 330, and that's what Ferrari is known for throughout the years. It's the V12 4-liter car. It's a 330 GT, 1967. And these are much less expensive than the others because it's a 2+2 rather than a 2-seat car.
I got you. Now, I see you got some Mercedes back here. How about some of them?
The one in the foreground is a 500 SE. That's a fairly late gray market car, if you will. It was brought over from Germany. The one on your right-hand side is a 228 Cabriolet, 1955. They made 400 or 500 of those. And we have a couple other Mercedes 500 SL, 250 SLs, 450 SLs.
Now, how about the old MG back there? What year is that car?
That's a 1952. It's fully restored.
Yeah, well, that goes back into my own youth as a mechanic. And how much you selling that for?
That one's $13,500.
You know, the last one of those I sold, I think I got $900 for it, but that was a long, long time ago. What else have you got back here?
Well, we've got an old Rolls 1966 Shadow. The yellow car that looks a little bit like the Dino is a kit car, actually. That's a very modified Volkswagen.
A Volkswagen?
And probably the most interesting car here right now is the orange Lancia Stratos. That's a 72, and those cars use the same motor as the Ferrari Dino. They were purchased from Ferrari, as Lancia at that time was also a subsidiary of Fiat, pardon me. And those won the World Championship 3 times.
Now, is that the Endurance Championship or the Rally Championship?
Rally Championship.
I see. And what else you got in the back room over here?
There's a 330 2+2, a couple other Lancia Aurelia, like we'll be running down at Monterey, 56 Thunderbird, V12 Jaguars, 928 Porsches, 356 Porsches, and older Alfa Romeos.
So now you know the other side of the used car business. The side that doesn't talk about low down payment or good gas mileage. Because here, nobody seems to really care about that. But what they do care about is if they have a good investment that's not going to depreciate and something that they can have fun driving around in. Because, you know, we all like to show off just a little. Hi, I'm Bob Hagan. In my role as Dr. Grease, I get lots of letters from all over the country. Letters about cars and why they don't work right. And one of the most mysterious to most listeners and readers is the fact that sometimes a car will give off the smell of rotten eggs, a very disagreeable smell. The culprit, of course, is the catalytic converter, something that we find in the exhaust systems and in line in the exhaust pipes of an awful lot of cars today. We've come to Tom Adair for the answer to this problem because he's, well, kind of an old-fashioned mechanic. He and his son Tom Jr. own and operate a small three-man garage in Pacheco, California. He's an expert on emission control systems, and he's also a state of California certified small check mechanic. But Tom, listen, I wonder if you could show us the catalytic converter on this Olds. This is the catalytic converter on this Oldsmobile. It looks like a second muffler, but it really is a whole lot more. In the case of this car, it's iridium-covered pellets inside this can, and when the exhaust comes in on this end dirty, it goes out the other end nice and clean. It gets awfully hot when it's working, but it really does the job. But Tom, the question is, why does it give off that rotten egg smell?
Well, one common cause is high sulfur content in the gasoline. Another one, and probably the most common, is too rich mixture in the fuel system. The carburetor dumps it in. The catalytic converter is trying to do its job, but because it can't burn off excessive fuel or high sulfur content, we get the smell out the exhaust.
Now, isn't that sulfur supposed to be controlled in this state? I mean, don't they have certain sulfur levels?
It's supposed to be controlled. However, sometimes it gets by and it's too high a content.
Maybe sometimes when the gas gets a little bit on the high side, close to the legal limits, then it starts getting off that, what is it, sulfur dioxide or hydrogen sulfide or one of those. I didn't pass my chemistry course too well, so we'll leave that to the chemists. But what does the catalytic converter really do? I mean, it allows us to do what? To get better performance out of the car, or exactly why did the guys put these things in these cars?
Well, of course, we all know is the more we get into emissions, the more the engineers design things to do a particular job. And in the case of catalytic converter, its sole function really is to try to burn off the carbon monoxide and stuff before it goes out to the atmosphere.
And in your opinion, it does a good job, huh?
In my opinion, it does what it's asked to do.
Now, as I recall, they're supposed to be guaranteed by federal mandate for 5 years or 50,000 miles as long as the car is given reasonable maintenance. Is that right?
That's correct.
And if one burns up, the factories are pretty well obliged to replace it free of charge, as I recall.
That's correct. Maybe reluctantly, but that is true.
Do you come across very many of them that aren't functioning in your role as doing the smog checks here?
At one time it was common. Now it isn't. Now that carburation is getting better, thanks to our engineers. But if we have a carburation problem, especially if it's extreme, too much fuel in the system, then we have a problem.
Now, I understand that they're kind of dangerous also. I've heard of mechanics catching their hair on fire. I've heard of grass fires being started when these cars were parked in high grass. How about yourself? Have you come across real problems?
The heat that is generated in the catalytic converter trying to do its job has caused some problems. In some cases, we've actually burned carpets and seats. It wasn't the catalytic converter's fault, really, because it was a carburation problem in every case that we ran into it. Sometimes we run into maybe faulty spark plugs or wires, bringing the hydrocarbons up high, and then it will also react and become too hot and can cause a problem.
So really, I guess what you're saying is if a car is kept in good shape, kept tuned up, and the owner keeps on top of the vehicle, he's not going to have too much troubles with the catalytic converters.
That's true. It's so important to keep your car well tuned.
And about what was the first year that these catalytic converters first started showing up in American-made cars, Tom, and foreign for that matter?
If my memory serves me right, Bob, I believe it was 1975.
So if you keep your car in good shape and keep it tuned up, you won't get that terrible smell. But if you don't, you might have to plan on buying just one more kind of an automobile accessory. Today, Auto America visits one of the most unusual auto parts stores around. Mal's A Sales in Pacheco only deals in parts for the Model A Ford, and the last one of those that Henry made rolled off the assembly line in May of 1931. Mal Staley's been a Ford Model A enthusiast since his high school days, and before that, he was an enthusiast for an even older Ford product, the Model T. But Mal, how'd you happen to get into this end of the business?
Actually, it just started as a hobby and kind of grew from a hobby, and I started the business at my home in my garage. For about 4 years, I was in my garage before we came down here. Had this building built here.
And how long have you been, what year was that you started in?
1960, this is our 25th year.
Wow, 25 years selling Model A Ford parts, huh? Well, listen, the thing that's always kind of curious to me is how do you find these parts? Who sells these?
Different small companies around the United States make most of the parts, or they contract for foreign companies. A lot of the parts come from Taiwan and Japan and Korea, but they're contracted by small vendors like we are here. We have parts made in Korea.
And is there anything left that Ford makes for the Model A Ford?
We have 3 items that I can think of, and one of them is right here. This carburetor comes directly from Ford, and they still make points and condensers for Model A's, and that's it. The design, actually this particular design, I think, I'm not 100% positive on that, but it would be around 30 years old.
Wow, and Ford still makes them and has them in their catalog, huh?
Right, exactly.
And now who is the kind of person that you sell these parts to? Who has Model A's?
It's changed quite a bit over the 25 years that I've been selling parts. It used to be high school kids and college kids that went out and bought a Model A for $100, and they're just using it as their only car. Nowadays, it's swung over to older people. Some of the same people still have their cars, but they're in their 40s. The average age is probably around 40 to 45 years old, that era.
And is there very many guys who still use their Model A's in everyday transportation, at least around here?
Very few, just 1 or 2 maybe is about it, just hardly at all anymore. Used to be quite a bit. 20 years ago, there was quite a few people that did.
So it's still a heck of a car, the old Model A, and if I kept all the ones I had when I was a high school kid, I'd have a heck of a lot more money than I have now. Mal's son Mick is up and coming in this business too, but he goes for Ford products that are a little newer. He concentrates on the parts for 20-year-old Ford Mustangs. Hanging around a place like Mal's A sales can be a real lot of fun for an old-timer like me. And sometimes it's almost like stepping back into the twilight zone. Auto America sometimes goes racing, and today we're looking at sports car racing as it was in the old days. The golden era of motor racing when sports car competition was the exclusive domain of wealthy sportsmen and socialites. In those days, a serious amateur like Briggs Cunningham could even win the 24-hour race at Le Mans, France. He could have, but he didn't quite make it. Lots of us old-timers remember those days, and we get to relive them again through vintage car racing. Races that are open to old-timers that used to slug it out on racetracks all over the world many, many years ago. This 1955 D-Type Jaguar is an example. Bought and raced by the French government that year, it placed 3rd at Le Mans behind the winning Jaguar D-Type, a twin to this car. Ken McMurphy owns an auto restoration plant, Auto Europa, here in Martinez, California. It's a world-class operation where cars like this are restored to their original brilliance and speed. Ken, let me ask you a couple of questions about this kind of racing. What kind of guy would have an obviously very expensive old machine like this and go out and race it and run the risk of bashing it to pieces?
Well, I think a lot of the guys just buy the cars because they're cars that they enjoyed when they were children and growing up and went to the races and watched them. And most of the guys are in a position right now where they can afford to buy the cars that they would like to have had when they were a kid.
Like that old adage that the only difference between men and boys is the price of their toys, huh? Well, speaking of the price of this car and the expense of it, how much is this D-Type Jaguar worth, do you suppose?
Well, nobody really knows for sure until the car is actually sold, and it's not for sale at this point, but it's well over $100,000.
Well, that's a lot of money for a race car. Now, they don't race for any money, do they? They're just strictly trophy drivers. And as a matter of fact, I think they're a little on the hesitant side about even letting too many people know who they are. I think you told me that this owner of this vehicle did not want his name used.
They like to keep anonymous as much as they can.
I see. I see. Now, where does a guy race a car like this?
Well, there's races all over the country. There's a big race coming up in Monterey down at Laguna Seca.
Where else would they be racing?
There's races at Sears Point that they have annually for the vintage race cars of this type, and they have races back in Atlanta. There's other races back on the East Coast also.
Now, I saw a Jaguar brought out here from, I think it was England one time, maybe 2-3 years ago. The guy raced at Laguna Seca. Do many of those guys bring those cars over here for restoration, or do they have their own kinds of plants like your Auto Europa over there?
There's a lot of shops in England that are doing restoration work. They're not really doing the show quality type work that we're doing in this country. They're mostly for go, and also they take it a lot more seriously. They're racing over there than we do here. They're not too bashful about going out and putting the other guy into the wall if they have to get around him.
So when they race in Europe, they race like they were racing for the 1955 World Championship.
Yeah, very much so.
Now, do you often go to these kinds of races yourself, or could you stand to see one of your proteges here, one of your restorations damaged like that?
Well, if it's damaged, it just means I have to fix it again. It's a little more income. I go to the races and I enjoy them.
Tom Wolfe says we can't go back home. But seeing these old-time race cars in action brings back lots and lots of memories for us old-timers. Thanks, Ken.